York Times bestsellers, A Tale Dark and Grim and Its Companions, the best-selling Unicorn Rescue Society series, and the Star Wars novel, The Empire Strikes Back, So You Want to Be a Jade. He is also the creator and narrator of Grim, Grimmer, and the Grimmest, #1 podcast for young people, and he produced the Netflix animated adaptation of A Tale Dark and Grim, which was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Animated Series. He lives in Brooklyn, New York, USA, with his wife and daughter. Happy to have Adam here.
Thank you so much. Talk to me, kind of like I'm here talking to you. I do not remember the name of the author. I don't remember any books the author wrote. I don't remember anything the author said. None. Except for one thing. Somebody asked the author, how do you know if you're a writer? You're smart than most writers. I didn't think I would be a writer when I grew up. I was pretty sure I'd be a professional basketball player. Didn't work out for me, I don't know why. But the author thought about it for a minute. She goes, how do you know if you're a writer? And then she goes, writers write. And I was like, duh, obviously, right? But then I thought about it, maybe she's got to point writers right. Do I write? Well, I write in school and my teachers tell me to. I write homework when I remember to do my homework, which is not very often. But do I write on my own for fun? Because I figured that's what she meant. The answer was, no, I never did. And so I decided on that day in 7th grade that I was not a writer and that I never would. And I was sure that I remember right where I was, walking out of the front, being like, oh, I'm never going to be a writer. But I'm here today. I wrote a bunch of books, which you've heard about. So how did that happen? It was, when I was a kid, what I did like to do, I didn't like to write. I found writing very difficult. I had very bad handwriting. It would always hurt my hands to write, and I would always get a headache over one eyebrow when I was writing. But what I did like to do was I would like to play and imagine. So the thing I like to do most of all was I had these action figures. You know what they are? They're called G.I. Joes in America. Little action figures. You don't know they're like, you know Barbies? Barbies? Like toys, right? Like little toys with like, but mine had like massive weapons, okay? And I would take them one in each hand, and one was usually the cool kid from school. The other one was me, not the cool kid. And the cool kid would say something mean and funny to me, and all the other G.I. Joes would laugh. And then my G.I. Joe would go, and beat him up, and I would feel very good about myself. So I used to do this for like hours a day. The other thing I used to do as a kid was I had a basketball hoop on my driveway, and I was very lucky because it was a cool basketball hoop. It could go up to 10 feet, which is full height, or down 5 feet. And had I really wanted to be a professional basketball player, I should have left it up at 10 feet and just practice my shot while they don't practice my ball. But I thought it was much more fun to pretend to play basketball. So I put it down at 5 feet. Then I would dunk and shoot three-pointers and take fadeaways. And the whole time I would talk to myself. I'd tell myself these stories about me making the NBA, what team I would be on, winning the championship, hours a day I was doing it. But eventually things changed. When I was 15 years old, I went away for the summer. So I became a teacher. I taught 1st grade, 2nd grade, 5th grade, and high school. And when I was teaching the little kids, I realized there are a lot of teachers in New York City, but I was the worst teacher in New York City. And the reason I was the worst teacher was the first thing a teacher has to do before they can teach the kids anything. I'm going to give you kids a teacher secret right now. Teachers, I'm sorry. The teachers have to get the kids to shut their mouths for like 2 minutes. If you guys won't be quiet, we can't teach you anything. And I could not get my kids to be quiet. I'm going to tell you a true story, and it's going to sound unbelievable, but it is true. I had one boy in my class whose name was Harry. Harry used to like play in the block corner, but unlike the other kids in the block corner who are building like towers and castles, Harry used to like to pick up the longest, heaviest blocks he could find and chase other kids around trying to hit them on the head with the blocks. And I'd be like, Harry, stop! So I'm trying to prevent him killing a child. While I'm trying to stop Harry, this other boy named Mick would climb up on the tables in my classroom and dance. I'm like, Mick, get down! And he's like dancing on my tables. I had another boy whose name was Reed. Reed used to like to go in the arts and crafts area, and he would take cotton balls and he would glue them to his face so he looked like a little Santa Claus, and he would sing Christmas carols. And I was like, Reed, that's not good for you. So it was just a madhouse. And one day, I was like, I can't teach these kids, I don't know what I'm doing. And I sit down in the middle of the rug, and 4 kids come up and sit around me, because in every classroom there's always like 4 nice kids who will help out the teachers no matter how badly things are going. And I say to the 4, I was like, I'm just going to tell you guys a story. Forget these kids. I'm just going to tell you guys a story. And I said, once upon a time. And as soon as I said that, the strangest thing happened. Harry, off in the block corner, goes, oh! And he stops. And he looks at me. And the kid he's about to brain is like, ah! Because he doesn't know, right? And Mick is dancing on the table. But he stops. And he looks. And Reed keeps gluing things to his face. And as I told the story, Harry very slowly dropped the block and came closer and closer to the rug. And Mick got down from the edge of the table and came over to the rug. And Reed kept gluing things to his face. I could never reach that kid. But by the end of the story, most of the kids were sitting around me, and I realized the one way I had of getting kids to shut their mouths and to listen to me was to tell stories. So I started telling a lot of stories in that class. The next year, I was teaching about ancient Egypt, mummies and pyramids and things. And I wanted to read the kids a book that took place in ancient Egypt. I wanted the gods to be real. I wanted it to be an adventure story. I didn't want any time travel. I couldn't find the right book for these kids. So I decided I've been telling stories all the last year. Maybe I'll try to write it down. Now, I still did not think of myself as a writer. I was a teacher. But luckily, I didn't have to write by hand anymore. Now I could use a computer. So I wrote 1 chapter of a story about ancient Egypt, and I brought it in and read it to the 2nd graders I was teaching. And they said, that's pretty good. What happens next? And I said, I don't know. So I went home, wrote the next chapter, and read it to them the very next day. And they said, what happens next? And I said, I don't know. So I went home, wrote another chapter, read it the next day. They were like, what happens next? I was like, I don't know. And every night I had to go home and write another chapter of the story, because if you've ever read a story to 2nd graders, you know that if you start it and you don't finish it, they will kill you, because they're terrifying little creatures. So I had to finish the story, and by the end of the school year, the book was 100 pages long, and I was very proud of it. So I decided that I would quit my job as a teacher and see if I could get the book published. My wife was very unhappy because half our income was gone, but I did it anyway. I quit my job, and I started to revise the book. Now, the book I had written was written for those kids. I had read it out loud to them, and every chapter as I wrote it, I imagined trying to keep Harry and Mick from leaving the table, leaving the rug, and going to kill somebody or climb on a table, right? So I was very specifically thinking about telling a story to those kids. But when I went to rewrite it as a book to be published, I thought, that's not how you write a book. It's got to sound fancy, and it's got to be a lot longer, and it's got to be complex with themes and beautiful lyrical language. So I took a whole year, and I took the book from 100 pages to 200 pages to 300 pages to 400 pages long. It took me a whole other year. I was very proud of it. And I sent it to an agent. An agent is somebody who helps you get your books published. And an agent, she read it, and she called me up, and she invited me to her office at the top of a skyscraper in Manhattan in New York City. I remember getting there. I took the elevator all the way up to the top floor. There are these huge windows. I sit down in this big comfy chair. She sits across from me, and I say, so what'd you think? And she says, it's not very good. And I was like, wait, what? I quit my job. It's 400 pages long. I spent a whole year doing it. All you can tell me is, it's not very good. She said, if you wanted to start on a new book, I wouldn't blame you. Which is adult code for throw it in the trash can. I was devastated. I was so upset. But I've never been very good at doing what people tell me to do, so she told me to quit, which meant I could not quit. So I started to revise the book. I took it from 400 pages down to 300 pages down to 250 pages long, and I was about to send it back to her when I got a phone call from the school that I used to teach at. I was substituting to make some extra money, just hang out with the kids, and they asked me if I'd be willing to be a substitute librarian for a day. And I was like, yes, because librarian is one of the best jobs I can imagine. You get to hang out with kids and share stories you like with kids. I was like, I want to do that. They said, you're going to be telling stories to 2nd graders. I said, no problem. They said, tell them any story you want. I said, great. So I went home, and I was looking around on my shelf for a good story to read to 2nd graders. And I came across my book of the real grim fairy tales. Now, if you've read any of my books, you know the real grim fairy tales. I looked at that and I was like, oh, fairy tales. Those are cute and sweet stories for little kids. The real grim fairy tales are not like that, but I didn't know that. So I opened the book up to a story called Faithful Johannes. And in the story, Faithful Johannes, 2 children get their heads cut off by their parents. They get put back on again, so they're fine. But I read that and I was like, that's interesting. Can I read this to 2nd graders? Will I get fired? And then I thought, let's find out. So I brought the book in and I started reading it to these 2nd graders. And very quickly they started to get very nervous. So I would make a joke to calm them down, or I would warn them something really terrifying was about to happen. And I think I did a pretty good job. Because at the end of the story, I looked up and every kid had the same expression on his or her face. Every kid looked exactly like this. I was like, oh boy. So I dismissed the kids. Some of them were crying. I think one little boy peed his pants. But a few of them came up to me afterwards, and I'll never forget it, because this little girl sticks her finger in my face, and she goes, that was good. And I was like, what? And she goes, you should make that into a book. And I was like, huh. So I went home, and I wrote down that story exactly the way I told it to those kids, with all the jokes and all the warnings, everything I said to them, right in the story. And I sent that to the agent instead of the Ancient Egypt book. And she called me up and she said, this is pretty good. And she became my agent, and that became the first chapter of my first book, A Tale Dark and Grim. So, at some point in your life, you might be doing something, and somebody might tell you that it stinks, and it's garbage, and you should quit. And at that point, you have 2 choices. You can believe that person, or you can prove them wrong. I recommend the second one. So, in this book, A Tale Dark and Grim, I'm going to read you just a little bit of the first chapter. Not the beginning, but sort of the end of the first chapter, because it will show you how I used exactly what I said to those kids in this. Because what we're doing today is we're working on a voice, how we use our voices to write. So there's a king. He has a helper, Faithful Johannes. He has fallen in love with a golden princess. He's gone to her kingdom and asked her to marry him, and she has just said yes. She came back up to the deck of the ship and saw that her land was far away. The princess realized that, in fact, the young king was just the kind of man she would like to marry, and decided that she'd give the whole marriage thing one more shot. She'd been married before. And they all lived happily ever after. The end. And then I write, are there any small children in the room? If so, it would be best if we just think this really is the end of the story and hurry them off to bed. Because this is where things start to get, well, awesome. But in a horrible, bloody kind of way. Which is exactly what happened. When I was telling the story to those kids, I was like, and they got married. The end. Because I was like realizing the scary part was about to happen. And they were like, no, it's not the end! And I was like, do you really want to hear more? And they were like, yeah! And I was like, okay, here we go. So here we go. As the ship plowed through the purple sea, the new lovers made moon faces at each other up near the bow. Faithful Johannes was sitting near the back of the ship, admiring the success of his plan. He is the helper. When he noticed 3 ravens land on a mast beam. The first raven motioned with his beak at the king and princess. What a lovely couple those 2 make, he said. And the second said, yeah, too bad they won't stay that way. And the first one said, what do you mean? Well, said the second, when the ship gets to land, a beautiful chestnut stallion will canter up to the group, and the king will decide to ride it back to the castle. But if he does, he will be thrown from its back and die. Good God, that's horrible, said the first raven. Is there nothing anyone can do? Oh, there is, said the second raven. Someone could kill the horse before the king mounts it. But what good is that? For if someone did it and told why he did it, he would turn to stone from the tips of his toes to the knobs of his knees. To stone? Asked the first raven. To stone, answered the second. The third raven, who'd been listening quietly to this point, cut in. It gets worse, you know, he said. If by some chance the 2 lovers escape that danger, another lies ahead. For when they arrive at the gates of the castle, a beautiful bridal gown made of pure gold will be laid on a bed of purple flowers. The princess will want to wear it, of course, but if she touches it, she will be consumed by a ball of fire and burned to cinder right there on the spot. Good God, that's terrible, cried the first raven. Is there nothing anyone can do? Oh, there is, said the third raven. If someone were to pick up the dress before she could and throw it in the fire, the princess would live. But what good is that? For if someone did it and told why he did it, he would be turned to stone from the knobs of his knees to the core of his heart. To stone, repeated the first raven. To stone, confirmed the third. Nor is that all, said the second raven morosely, for if the two lovers avoid that tragedy, a final one awaits. If when they are married and begin the wedding dance, the new queen will swoon and fall to the floor and die. Good God, that's the worst thing yet, cried the first raven. Is there nothing anyone can do? Oh, there is, said the third. Okay, this gets disgusting. If you don't want to hear something disgusting, close your ears, okay? If someone were to bite the new queen's lip and suck 3 drops of blood from it with his mouth, she would live. But what good is that? For if someone did it and told why he did it, he'd be turned to stone from the core of his heart to the top of his head. To stone, said the first. To stone, replied the second. To stone, echoed the third. And with that, the 3 ravens shook their black beaks, sighed sadly, and flew away. Faithful Johannes, the servant, buried his head in his hands, for he had heard all. He knew what he would have to do, and that could not come to good. All right, so then all of those things happen. I'm going to skip to this next part. So first, they get off. There's the horse. They get on the horse. He tries to get on the horse. Johannes kills the horse. King wants to kill him, but then he's like, no, we'll trust him. Then there's the dress comes, and Johannes throws the dress in the fire, and the dress explodes. But then finally, the queen falls to the floor, and Johannes, who's very old and ugly, takes her to his room, and he bites her lip and sucks 3 drops of blood from her lip with his mouth, and the king sees it, and the king says, treason! And they go to burn faithful Johannes alive for what he did. But Johannes tells them what happened, and he turns to stone from his toes to his head. And when he turns to stone, the king and the queen learned too late that Johannes had been faithful to the very end and had given his life for his king. So in an effort to honor his memory, they took faithful Johannes and placed him inside their bed, so every morning when they woke up and every evening when they lay down, they would be reminded of his faithfulness and the great debt they owed him. The end. Well, not really. More like the beginning, for it is here that the tale of Hansel and Gretel truly begins. The king and queen had a beautiful pair of twins, a girl and a boy. They named the boy Hansel and the girl Gretel. They made everybody so happy. But one day, as they were playing at the foot of the bed, the king said, he understood me, but I did not understood him. And he cried on faithful Johannes' statue. And then the statue spoke. There is a way, king, the stone Johannes said, to rescue me from this rock, if truly you wish it. Oh, I do, the king cried. I'll do anything, anything. And Johannes said, there are no young children in the room, right? You're certain? Okay. Johannes said, you must cut off the heads of your children and smear my statue with their blood, and then, and only then, will I return to life. The king collapsed on the bed weeping. But then he stood up, beckoned Hansel and Gretel to his side, drew a sword from its place on the wall, and cut off their heads. Their lifeless bodies dropped to the floor. The king took the blood on his hands and smeared it on the statue, just as he had told. Johannes returned to life, covered in the children's blood. And the king, despite the blood and through his tears at his own children's death, threw his arms around his faithful servant, Johannes. The end. Nearly. Johannes smiled his sweet, crooked smile and said, you understood me at the greatest cost. And he placed little Hansel's head back on his body and little Gretel's head on hers, and instantly they began to leap and play as if nothing had happened and as if they were not entirely covered in blood. The king threw his arms around them and then around Johannes, and they all laughed with joy. The end. Almost. You get it. You get the point, right? So I keep messing with the kids, and then I say, you see, the way the Brothers Grimm tell it, it is the end, but it's not really, not at all. For the king, as the king told his wife what had happened, Hansel and Gretel heard and understood. Late that night, they lay in their beds, unable to sleep. Hansel, Gretel said. Yes, Gretel. Did you hear what Father said? Yes. He cut off our heads to save that ugly old man. Hansel was silent. And Mommy was glad that he did. Do you think they hate us? Hansel was silent still. I think we should run away, Gretel said, in case they want to do it again. That's just what I was thinking, Hansel answered. Just what I was thinking. So you can see how that chapter was totally shaped by how I told it to those kids. So I have a question for you. What was the difference between what I did in A Tale Dark and Grim and what I did in that book, the Ancient Egypt book that never got published? I revised the Ancient Egypt book in a certain way. Do you remember what I said? Yeah, who can explain it? Go ahead. Here.
Once you told the kids the story, then you decided I want to publish the book, and then you made it from 100 pages to 400 pages long.
Yeah.
And then when you went to the agent, she said it's not good, and then you were devastated.
When I took it from 100 pages to 400 pages, what was I trying to do? What do you remember what I was saying I was trying to do with it?
You try to make it long and fancy and something that like people older than second graders would enjoy and love and like a lot more.
Yeah, and I thought that yes, exactly right. I thought that a book had to sound fancy. You want to add to that? Go ahead. Yeah, but not just so other people can enjoy it, so it sounded like a big fancy novel. Did you want to add to that? It's exactly right. I told that story for those kids. Had I not changed it, it might have been published. And the only way I ever got a published book was I went back to telling stories to kids and then just wrote down exactly what I said. So that's what I want to try today with us. So you all tell stories to your friends and your family all the time. Sometimes they're a joke, sometimes it's a funny thing that happened or a scary thing that happened to you. So right now, I want you to think of your best story. The story that you tell to your friends and they laugh. Or you tell to your grandma and she goes, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened," right? And I want you to turn to the person next to you and you're going to tell them that story. And then they're going to tell you their best story back. These should be short. I'm going to give everyone 5 minutes to do this. So each story should be no longer than 2 minutes, okay? Think of a story that you like to tell. I'm sure you all have one. And turn to the person next to you and you're going to tell them a story. Does anyone know what story they're going to tell right away? Does anyone have an idea? Okay, just give us a summary. What's it about? Two friends and how they met. Great. Do you know what your story is going to be about?
And what he ate.
A boy and what he ate.
Became alive.
And it became alive. Now, are these true stories or not? You wrote it, okay. But can you tell it in like 2 minutes? You can tell it short? Okay. Well, I kind of meant like a true story that happened to you. Or like something like a vacation you took and this crazy thing happened, okay? But you can do a fictional story if you want to, okay? All right, I'm putting a lot of pressure on you. Just tell a story. Turn to the person next to you and tell a 2-minute story about something that happened to you. Here.
This is more of my parents' story and not exactly mine. So this is a story my father used to tell me. Once, this was before I was born, and I was like, I didn't even exist, like not even in my mother's womb. So basically, my father and and two of his friends, along with my mother, so 4 of them, they were at a beach together. I don't remember where exactly it was, but they were just together, and it was like past midnight. It was like 12 a.m. So they obviously decided to go home at one point. So apparently my godfather, who became my godfather, he offered to drive them all back home. Oh yeah, it was Chennai. So the place they were in was Chennai, and he offered to drive them all back home. But on the way, he ran over an old woman apparently, but nobody really noticed that. But all of us. No, but all of a sudden, the driver kind of noticed a flying figure, and he got really scared, and then he just he was just dead silent, and then he dropped everyone home. And apparently, when he returned back home, the minute he opened the front door, he saw a figure of that woman. I mean, I don't really think this story is real because that just can't be. But that's what I was told. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so freaky story, and did you hear how? The way you just said it, and I don't know if this is really true, but that's what I was told. In a minute, not yet, we're going to take out paper and pencils and we're going to write down our stories and we're going to try to preserve the way we tell it. Now, some things will change, right? Like sometimes you're like saying like this happened, like that happened. You don't have to write in every like. But that the way you just did that with like, I don't know if it's really true, was a great ending. But if you were trying to make it sound fancy, you might have left that out. So remember how you just told it, because in a minute you're going to write it down. That was fantastic. I saw another volunteer over here who's volunteering a friend. Yes?
All right, so about like 6 months ago, I was playing football on this football pitch, and the class was over, so I was trying to exit, and then I ended up taking a wrong turn on the way to the exit. So like I took a right instead of going left, and then I ended up on this patch of dirt, and like I could see lights like really far off, so I figured like maybe the exit is that way. So I kept walking, and then I ended up like there were these big mounds of earth. And then I just like stopped because it was really grassy and like I couldn't see what was in front of me. So I was trying to decide whether to go all the way back or to like keep going toward the light because I was almost there. And then there was this dog. Like I heard this dog coming toward me. Like I could hear its footsteps. I couldn't really see it because it was quite dark. And then it was like running toward me. So I just bolted as fast as I could. And then I think halfway through it just stopped, but like I couldn't hear that because my footfalls were so loud and like I was just panting a lot. So I was like totally terrified. And then I ended up running all the way back in like maybe 20 seconds. I don't know.
That's a scary story. I love it.
Yeah. And then I found the other exit and then I exited with everyone else.
And didn't tell your parents.
Yeah, I didn't tell my parents.
That's a great story. No, now your parents know. Now they know. Anybody else want to volunteer themselves or their partner? Yeah, you, and then you? Okay, great.
So this was a real experience which happened to me. So in my old school, we were going for this field trip to this place named Wonderla. So all of us were really excited and everything. We were packing all our swimsuits and everything. We made sure to not miss anything, and we purposely didn't bring any food because we wanted to buy from the stalls over there. And when we got there, they said there was no more tickets. But then when we were just about to get in the bus, a person with glasses, we don't know who it was, he came to us and sold us 25 tickets. There were total 25 of us. So he told us, he sold us 25 tickets. All of us were so happy. So one of my friends almost went and hugged him, but then he went somewhere. So then all of us split up, even though our coach told us not to. And me and my friend went to the water park, and then after we were done, we went to this 3D theater thing. It was so scary. It was about some creature named a Minotaur. So and then it was where it would be chasing us. So after that it was dark and we didn't know where we were. We didn't know if the bus had already left because only me and my friend were there. So after that we went out. We tried to go out of the Wonderla, but then they didn't let us because we were without an adult. So we asked them to call our coach. Then the whole bus came all the way back, and our coach took us in, and everybody in the bus was swearing at us for making them come all the way back.
That's great. Great story. All right, another one, yeah? And then one more. Okay.
So this barely happened a few weeks before school started. So me and my family had gone to Uttarakhand and we were hiking. And I have two younger sisters, by the way, they're twins. And me and one of them, let's call her Harini, her name's Harini. And so we're going ahead and I'm like listening and I'm vibing to music right now and I'm like listening and dancing. And then I like feel like my sister's calling me. So like I turn around and I'm like, what? But then I don't see her at all. Like keep in mind, this is like a hill and like there's this cliff, okay? And so I'm like, where is she? And then I see her and I look down and then she's holding on for dear life. And right below there's a pond and it gets worse because there's absolutely no one around. And so I'm bending down and like pulling her up, but I can't pull her up because like she's slipping. And then like out of luck, like there was this couple that came over and then like they rushed in and helped. And like my sister's like in shock because she has no idea what happened. I'm like staring and I'm like, what do I do? And then of course later on my parents came on and everything was settled. And then I realized next time I'm going hiking, I'm not going with my sister because that was just scary.
Great story. I love that. That's great. That's lovely. Okay.
So I went to this camp with 4 of my friends, and it was like this nature camp. Okay, yeah. So one day it was storming really heavily, and there was like this roofed area of sorts. So all of us went like drenched to the core, and we were just huddling there. Yeah, and then it started storming, so we were all like really terrified because like thunder, lightning, and it's kind of camp in the middle of nowhere. So we were like, okay, what's going on? And it was like this thatched roof structure. Yeah. So then, what we were just talking to each other, and then suddenly there was this particularly loud burst of thunder. So we were like, "Oh my God, group hug!" Okay. So then we huddle in and we do a group hug, and we all like bend, and I'm like really tall, so I'm like bending over to hug my friends, and then our eyes are closed. When we open our eyes and look around us, the roof is like has fallen, literally. The entire roof. The roof was like there, like above, and then when we open our eyes from the group hug and we like try to get up, the roof is like maybe like half an inch above our head. And then all of us are just like, oh my God, if we were like even a minute late for the group hug, we would have lost our heads, literally. So yeah, that was an interesting experience.
That's excellent. Okay, these are fantastic. All right, we have a few more. You guys want to tell them? Okay, you know what? Not yet, because I want to make sure we all have time to write. So what we're about to do right now is I want you to take the story the way you told it, and I want you to try to write it down. Maybe 1 or 2 sheets of paper. Don't try to make it long. Don't try to make it fancy. Try to preserve your voice. The way you tell a story is what needs to get on the paper. You can always edit it later if you want to make it a little fancier, a little less fancy, a little longer. But just try to capture your voice on the piece of paper, okay? Like you told it fantastic. Just write it like that. Get some paper, yeah? There should be paper on every table, and there should be pencils too. I suddenly realized that I had been a writer my whole life. Every day of my life, I spent 2 or 3 hours a day telling stories. I never wrote any of them down, but it's the same thing I do now, except now I get paid to do it. So when you tell your stories to your friends, you're writing. And you just haven't written it down yet, and now you're starting to write it down. And when you write it down, try to preserve the way you tell it, because that's your unique voice. And that voice will evolve and change as you get older. But what you have there, no one else has. No one tells a story like you tell it. No one. I want to say one last thing about voice, because I think I have an hour here. So I'm going to tell one last thing about voice, and then I'm going to open it up to maybe a couple minutes of questions. Finding your voice in writing is what we've been talking about. But the key to finding your voice in writing, I think, is finding your voice in your life. So I'm going to tell you about a time in my life when I did not know what my voice was. This is very embarrassing for me, so you're welcome. When I was in 6th grade and 7th grade, I was a class clown. I would act up. I got sent to the principal's office 2 or 3 times a week. And there were some boys in my grade who I thought were really cool. They were the cool kids. And they actually turned out to be pretty cool. I was right about it in 7th grade because they ended up having a rock band that became famous later. So they were cool. But I really wanted to be friends with them. And they liked having me around, mostly to make fun of me or to sort of use me. But then, they would we would play hide and seek. And I would be hiding, and then hiding for a really long time. And then I would look up, and they were all gone. Stuff like that. You don't smile at that. Just kidding. And then one day, the worst it ever got was I had gone to the shopping mall with my mom and found a shirt that I thought was cool. And I bought it and put it on. Now, these cool kids at the time, they were skateboarders. They liked to skateboard. So I put on this shirt, wore it to school. And right before science class started, we were sitting around. The teacher wasn't in the room yet. And the coolest of the cool kids goes, "Why are you wearing that shirt?" And I was like, I don't know. I thought it was nice. I bought it. And he was like, "That's a skateboarding shirt. You're not a skateboarder." And I was like, sorry. Then he goes, poser. Now, the word poser, I don't know if you've heard it, but at the time meant someone who pretends they're something they are not, like a pretender. And he said, poser. And then somehow, through the magic of cool kids, he got all of the kids in my classroom to point at me and chant, poser, poser, which was just about the worst day of my life. And so soon after that, I decided, like, I should stop trying to be friends with these guys. But there were some other kids that I decided to try to be friends with. And they weren't the cool kids. They were the bad kids. And we got in a lot of trouble together, doing, like, really bad things. We didn't hurt anybody, but things that were not legal. And eventually, I got in so much trouble with them, I was grounded for a month. I had to go visit a jail, a prison, to be like, this is what's going to happen to you if you keep doing stuff like this. That I decided, that was in 8th grade. In 9th grade, I would have no friends. That's what I decided. And so every day at lunch, I would sit with people, but I'd sit with different people every day, and then they would say, hey, you want to come hang out after school? And I'd say, no, I'm okay. And I decided because I couldn't be trusted to have friends. And a funny thing happened that year. Because I didn't have friends, or didn't want to try to have friends, didn't want to impress anybody, I started paying attention to my classes. And it turns out I liked them. I thought history was really interesting. It was just like the most interesting stories in the history of the world. I was like, oh, I want to know those. And English was great because they were just like, this book's good, you should read it. And I would read it and I'd be like, hey, this book is kind of good. And I started getting really into school and doing a lot better. And at the end of the school year, there were these two guys, and they came up to me after school one day, and they were like, hey, after school, we're going to go play this nerdy board game at my house. Do you want to come? And I was like, I'm not supposed to have friends, but I really want to play this nerdy board game, like a lot. So I said yes. And I didn't have to pretend to be something that I wasn't. I didn't have to pretend to be cool or act bad. And they became my best friends, and they are still my best friends to this day. One of them is the godfather of my daughter, and the other one I created this book series with, and his picture should be in the back of this book. Yes, unless they took it out. Where are you, Jesse? Ah, yeah, here. The guy with the beard. He didn't have a beard when we were in 9th grade, but he's been one of my best friends ever since. So I would never have been able to become a writer or feel confident enough to tell stories to kids if I hadn't gone through a period of time when I said, I'm going to stop listening to everyone else's voice and start trying to listen to my own. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. I would love to leave it open to questions if you have any questions about anything that I've just talked about. Writing, how do you get to be a writer? Is it fun to be a writer? How do you find your own voice? Why do you write such messed up, bloody stories for children? What's wrong with you? How much money do writers make? How do you write a book? Anything like that. But before I do that, I've been sitting for a long time, so we're going to do Little Simon Says. All right? Everyone, you did this yesterday, right? That's okay. Wait, we'll do this instead then. Everyone take your fingers going like this. Without leaving your seats, please raise your fingers in the air as high as you can. Go. Higher. 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 Okay, now bring them down and squeeze yourself. Like you love yourself so much. Hug yourself harder. Harder. Try to crack a rib. Okay, shake your hands real loud. Shake them faster. Shake them faster. Shake them faster. Now put them in the air. Now put them in your laps. You guys look ridiculous. Okay. Who has a question? Yes.
You told me that you also first didn't like writing. So what gave you that inspiration to writing? Because even I have that feeling right now that writing is too much hand, and I don't want my hand to pain, and it's just too boring.
Yeah. So, but you probably like telling stories. I know you did. I just heard you, right? So first of all, the writing part got much easier when I got older because I could type. And also when you're older, you just have more patience. But also, I was truly just trying to get those kids to be quiet. And so I was telling stories. And when I told enough stories, I realized I can type this, right? Imagining it in the first place and writing it was hard. But if I already knew the story I wanted to tell and then just typing it, it didn't feel so hard. Okay? Yeah. Yes?
I start by writing a book. Like, because every time I want to write something, I just don't get any ideas. So
Okay. So anytime you want to write something, you just don't get any ideas. The problem is that you're doing things backwards, in reverse. You never say, I want to write something. What am I going to write about? Unfortunately, in school, they kind of make you. The way it works is, oh, that's so cool. I'm going to write about it. The idea should come first. And when you get an exciting idea, it may not be at a good time to write. So I email myself. You probably don't have email. So just write it down and put it in a drawer in your room. Set aside one drawer where you know your ideas are. And you're like, oh my gosh, what if my grandma turned humongous and attacked a city? That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Write it down. Grandma turns humongous, attacks a city. And put it in the drawer. And later, when you're like, I want to write something, take it out of the drawer and be like, here's my idea. And then you write that, okay? That's what I do. Yes? Oh, good question. In the book, did I put it back? It's here? Oh. Were you trying to steal my book? In the book, How Do You Tell Whose Voice is Which One? We decided to put it in bold. So, I don't know if you can see from there. So this is the regular part of the story, and then this is the part where I'm like, are there any little kids in the room? So I put it in a different font so you knew it was a different voice. Good question. Yes? Yes. Yeah. I'm so sorry about that. Did it give you bad dreams? It made you a vegetarian. Well, then you're welcome. It's good for your health.
About anything and everything that's going on, and I twist them into the most fantasy and do that. But could I actually publish a book?
Great question. And how would you do that? Great question. So as a young person, it is very hard to publish a book like this, mostly because in the publishing industry, they want you to be an adult. For lots of reasons, it's easier for them if you're a grown-up. But there are ways for you to publish your stories too. One good way is writing contests. I don't know about in India, but I know in the United States there are many writing contests, and some of which you can apply to from India. Like the biggest one is called Scholastic. You know, the Golden Key. Yeah? Did you do that? Amazing. So your book, your stories were already got out there. People saw them. There are also wonderful magazines like Stone Soup, which is all kids writing. That's how I would start. If you really want to try to make it a full book, you can, there's an app, you have to ask your parents' permission, called Wattpad, and if they give you permission, you know about that, right? So you're already doing it all, okay? To get a book published, right now the most important thing you can do is to have as much fun as you possibly can while you're writing. The more fun you have, the more creative your writing will be, and the more you'll do it, and you'll get better. And then, when you're 18 years old, your best novel, you'll send it off to a publisher, and I believe that they will publish it right away. Yes?
So you spoke about your childhood where you played with those action figures. You used to talk to yourself a lot while you played and practiced basketball at a five-foot structure. But you also mentioned that later when you went to high school, those things kind of changed. The action figures were broken by your brother. So later in life, when you went to tutor the same kids, the kids of your age, when back then, when you used to play action figures, did you find something in them that inspired you to kind of appreciate the thinking that went into when you used to play with the action figures? So in life, when you think those are lame, later in life, did you realize that, oh, those were actually so creative, or those actually did play a part in your writing books?
Yes, beautifully said. I couldn't say it any better myself. Yes. The answer is yes, that's exactly what happened. It's beautifully said. Sorry. Yes. Yes. You think that you grow out of it, but hopefully you don't. I remember when I was about 10, I asked my father, do you ever imagine? And he said, well, sometimes I think about what's going to happen the next day. And I was so sad. I was so depressed. And I said to myself, I never want to stop imagining. So luckily I have a job where I literally am paid to imagine. Yeah, so I'm very lucky. Maybe you all will be too. Yes?
You said that your teacher told that a way to find out that you're a writer is if you write, and you proved it wrong, basically. So what, according to you, how do you know that you're a writer?
I'm so glad you asked it. I should have said it earlier. I'm glad you listened carefully, because I've done this talk and had teachers tweet out, put on the internet afterwards, Adam Gidwitz says, writers write. And I'm like, no, that's the opposite of what I said. So you were listening. Writers imagine. Writers tell stories. You can write them down now, or you can write them down later. But if you're imagining or even telling your friends stories, you're writing. You're a writer. Okay? Great question. I'm going to go over here. Yes?
What were your greatest challenges while writing the book, The Inquisitor's Tale?
Good question. We are almost out of time. The greatest challenges in writing the book, The Inquisitor's Tale, in fact, I was going to tell you about this, and then I thought I was running out of time, but I'll tell you. I wrote the whole book. It's a big medieval adventure. My editor read it, and she said, Adam, I have bad news. And I said, what? And she said, it's boring. I said, what? She said, you came home from doing all this research with all these amazing stories that you told me about, and somehow you put them in a novel, and it's boring. And I was like, no. And then I talked to my wife, and she had an idea. We had met in a Chaucer class. Chaucer wrote a book called The Canterbury Tales, where a bunch of people meet in a tavern and tell each other stories. She said, could you be inspired by that? I said, yes. So I rewrote the whole book from the perspective of people sitting in a tavern telling each other stories. Because if you've ever been in a school cafeteria and you want to tell your friends a story, can it be long and slow? No. People are getting up, they're leaving, they're putting their trays down, it's loud. You got to make it fast and funny. And each chapter I did with a different character, a different voice. So when I'm doing it, it felt very much like I was playing with my action figures again, right? I had to get back to that thing to make it not boring. Good question. All right, one last question.
Say that if I want to publish a book when I'm an adult and your publisher has the rights, what do you think is the most challenging part when you're actually trying to publish it and trying to put your own ideas through instead of the publisher's?
You don't have to worry about that. The publisher is not interested in putting their ideas in the book. They have too many other things to do. They want your ideas, okay? All right, last question.
Adam, I just wanted to know, you just spoke about how you were inspired by Chaucer's tale of the Canterbury Tales, right? Like we all get inspired by great writers, and I'm very sure many of the students here are inspired by you. And I just wanted to know, how much does lived experiences, inspire a writer to write something?
Our lived experiences are so important. The very wonderful writer Jane Yolen once said, if you've had a childhood, you can write a novel. Because you have so many experiences just as young people that are make you angry or make you scared or make you happy or all of those things combined. If you've had a childhood, you can write a novel. So all of you will use your experiences as you become writers. Thank you for being here in this hot room with me today. It is so, if you have more questions, come up to me afterwards. Thank you. You were wonderful and great job. Keep your writing, okay? And if you take this writing that you did today and publish it, you have to send me 10% of all the money you make, okay? Okay? All right, great.